Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Unity FM's Islam Through the Ages. This is episode 5 and today we're going to be talking about Asia. Me, Daniel Raza, I'm joined in the studio by the owner of thehalalchoice.com and of course a very renowned historian, Dr. Stef Keris. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Stef.
Wa alaikum assalam, Daniel. Jazakallah khair for the introduction.
So, we talked about in the last episode the expansion of Islam to Africa in general, and one of the very interesting things we learned was that Islam was very much prominent in Africa before its origin, of course, in Saudi Arabia. And this, of course, may well be very surprising to some, but we knew about the first hijrah to the Abyssinia, and we also learned about how Islam spread due to a lot of merchants and trade routes in Africa, and this, of course, was the peaceful spread of Islam, not, as many people may say, as being spread by the sword, which, of course, we know is not true.
Very good, Jazakallah khair. That's exactly it. I mean, we are proving it right here, basically, and anybody, but I keep saying it to the people also when I have a lecture. I keep telling the students or whoever it is actually sitting, I keep telling them, listen, it's not because I say it is right. I tell my children that. Not because I say it, it's something that you have to believe. No, all this can be found. It's not something that, this is all what I'm telling you here now is research of the last decades that I've been busy with this subject. Since I became Muslim, I accepted Islam 21 years ago. And even before that time, actually, history brought me, because I was always a history freak. And history brought me towards Islam. Instead of pushing me away, as some people say, that history should actually show you that Islam is not like this, it's not tolerant or whatever. In the contrary, it pulled me closer. And as a Greek, I grew up in Germany, and I went to Greek school that time, to primary school. And I remember we were all taught these typical myths that they're still taught in Greece nowadays. The Turks, the Ottoman Turks, how terrible they were towards our women and towards our children and towards our religion and culture and everything. And you know what? I was questioning at that time already when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. I was questioning if it was really like this. And alhamdulillah, that, as I said, led me to towards the understanding of Islam and finding out that actually it was not the way that they presented Islam and the Muslims and the Ottoman Turks in Greece. It was not like this. And that all led me to find out about, going deeper into the issue of Islam itself as a religion, as a deen, as we call it, mashallah. So yes, indeed, we're going to speak about Asia today, Central Asia especially. And we'll mention, of course, we'll go into China and India a little bit. India definitely. China would like to leave for later, inshallah, for another episode, because we will have an episode about Southeast Asia. We'll have an episode about Indonesia, Malaysia, the Indonesian archipelagos, China, and Southeast Asia. Actually, I would like to leave this for later in general. Indochina, as it's called. So Thailand, we have countries like Cambodia, Thailand, of course, Vietnam. So these are all countries. Laos, we can all find them in Southeast Asia.
Look at the vast expansion that we have to have 10 one-hour episodes to talk about every single one of these places.
This is nothing. This is nothing. It's absolutely nothing. Yes, you're right, Daniel. It's very good that you mentioned this one. Indeed, that's nothing. I mean, having 10 hours even, or having 10 days is nothing. We can discuss, we can do that all. It's wonderful. And we haven't gone into details. I mean, we discussed very general, brief things and mentioned some West African countries, mentioned some East African countries, mentioned some places here and there. We didn't even go deeply into the countries. But in the case of Persia, Iraq, we mentioned it before. I don't know if you remember something about Iraq. Iraq actually accepted, or the people in Iraq accepted Islam quite at the beginning, right?
Yeah, they actually accepted Islam, I believe, before the Arab. Well, would you have said state?
Sorry, say that again?
Would you have said before the Arab state itself had basically fully accepted Islam?
It was no. I mean, Islam spread towards Iraq the same way it spread towards the east. The time it spread towards the west from the Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah.
And we saw that actually during the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, who was the fourth caliph, in Iraq and even Iran, certain areas in Iran, they were under his rule, and he fought Muawiyah, we saw unfortunately, and Muawiyah took the support by Syria and Egypt. Iraq and Iran and Persia actually played an important role that time already. The Persian Empire, we should not forget. You know about the Persian Empire? I mean, during the time of Islam, during the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yeah, they were very wealthy. I think they were mostly consisting of nomads, and I believe that most of them were practicing Zoroastrianism.
Zoroastrianism is a very, very important religion that you mentioned here, a very important word, because indeed Zoroastrianism was the main religion actually of the Persians. And the Persian Empire, together with the Persian Empire in the east and the Byzantine Empire in the west, these were the two big empires that the Muslims had to fight basically at the beginning, especially before they moved further. And these were the two big empires. They actually also fought against each other. The Greeks always had a problem with the Persians. The Persians had a problem with the Greeks simply because of course, wanting to rule certain areas. And that's how it used to be in the past, of course, no problem. Now, Zoroastrianism, as we said, Zoroastrianism is the religion, or was the religion of the Persians. What do you know about Zoroastrianism? What exactly is this?
Well, Zoroastrianism is not so much around as much as it was back then, but there's still areas where you can see in Persia or Iran and Iraq, there is still places where we can see the evidence of it, and there's only a few 100,000 of them around right now, I believe.
Yeah, the numbers, I don't know the exact numbers indeed, but they're not very that many, and 100,000 I think I would find them too many even. But anyways, Zoroastrians are around. There are some in Iran, and these are the ones who basically clearly reject Islam. They reject Islam as their religion. Might it be now Shiism or Sunnism? We're not discussing this issue, but they clearly reject the matter of Islam, so they call themselves Zoroastrians. And Zoroastrianism, actually, during the time that the Arab forces were garrisoned actually in the areas of Iran, Iraq, became associated with rural areas. We should not forget that Islam spread mainly in the new countries, in cities.
Mm-hmm.
So some historians call Islam actually an urban religion, something that really belongs to cities, something that is something that can spread within cities. I don't know if I want to go that far. I mean, Islam is something for everyone all over the world. It doesn't matter if you're not living on the countryside, if you're living in the cities, but it has spread mostly within the cities. It is really something that you can find mostly within the cities, and you can find it in Iran, or you could find it in Iran. Zoroastrianism it was associated with rural areas, and Islam was associated with the city areas, And even at the end of the Umayyad period, the Muslim community was only a minority in the region. So by 750, the end of the Umayyad period, even that time, the Muslim community was only a minority, mainly in the cities. Okay, but this all changed radically. Islam was readily accepted by Zoroastrians who were employed in industrial and artisan positions because, according to Zoroastrian dogma, such occupations that involved defiling fire made them impure. Now here we come to the core aspect, to the idea of Zoroastrianism. It is basically fire worship. Fire plays an important role in their idea of a religion. And the beginning, I don't want to say that there was a lot of, they were giving counter to Islam and to the Muslims, but as I said before, it was something that it was divided between the rural areas being Zoroastrian and the city areas, the urban areas being Muslims, but that all changed within some years. They were not as difficult to accept Islam as the Berbers were in North Africa, for example, that we mentioned before. I mean, it took them decades to accept Islam in the end, with all the zeal that they still had in the end, of course, then to propagate Islam, to go on with Islam in Al-Andalus. But here, in the case of the Zoroastrians, they could find many similarities between Islam and their own faith. And the Muslims did not encounter too many difficulties. So many Zoroastrians accepted Islam easily. Zoroastrianism actually, after a while, became something that was matter of the past, a religion of the past. Nowadays, I keep hearing that there are some people accepting or being Zoroastrians, rather consider themselves as being Zoroastrians. And I think you mentioned something before in the break. Could you mention that before, please?
Zoroastrianism is very prominent. I believe there's 68,000 of them in India.
Okay. Okay, that's new to me, mashallah. Jazakallah khair. That's good. Yes, it is. There are certain parts in India you will, of course, find Zoroastrianism. It is that area, the entire area of Central Asia, going into India. A large number of the inhabitants of the region, consisting of northern Afghanistan nowadays, accepted Islam through the Umayyad missionary efforts. Well, this is something I'm quoting here now. The Umayyad missionary efforts. I don't like using missionary efforts for Muslims. There, as we said, the Umayyads did propagate Islam, but we never had really missionaries in Islam like the Christians have. So I think the term missionaries is wrong. Let's use the term da'is, which we have in Arabic, making da'wah, basically, informing people about Islam rather than putting it as something to accept. It's something that is totally free in Islam. There is no necessity for people to accept it. They just have to, it's up to them to basically accept it or not. We have to leave the people free to decide, mashallah. And the efforts that during the Umayyad period were going on, they went that far that in northern Afghanistan, especially areas like northern Afghanistan nowadays, people accepted Islam quite easily, particularly under the reign of Hisham ibn Abdul Malik and Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Now, in this Central Asian area, we will find that Islam was pretty much there at the beginning already, as we saw in the first 12 years of the rules of the Caliph, the first two Caliphs especially, but then also going into the Umayyad dynasty. So this all developed, basically. The Islam that was practiced mainly is Sunni Islam. We should be clear about this one also, because we do have areas nowadays where the Shias are the majority, like in Iran nowadays is known. It's a Shiite country, but also Azerbaijan, other countries that you can find still in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan, you will be able to find some Shia offsprings and Shia sects. And the fusion of Islamo-Persian culture, which was taken over from Persia into the Central Asian area, this indicated also some kind of Sunni Shia Islam problem. Let's put it that way if you want to. As I said, Azerbaijan is a country which nowadays is basically mainly Shia. Other countries like Kazakhstan, they do have a big we do have Shia, but also Sunni populations as well, and this is something that will play a role up to nowadays in Central Asia. The first complete translation of the Quran into Persian occurred during the reign of the Samanids in the 9th century. Important now here to mention, we will be talking a lot about Persian and Persian language and Persian culture in Central Asia, because Islam came from that area. And Persian played rather the role that Arabic played in the other parts of the world. So people would rather learn Persian and would even feel affiliated to Persian culture, rather closer to the Persians than to the Arabs. And that, of course, made many people later accept also rather Shiite Islam than Sunni Islam. And if you look at the Turkic tribes, and we have to talk about them as well, because they will play a big role in Central Asia during that time, but also nowadays, the Turkic tribes, and I want to make sure that people understand here, Turkic tribes means tribes that have a Turkic background. That means in Central Asia, that's where the Turks originate from. The Turks that we know nowadays in Turkey originally come from the Asia of the area of Central Asia, going even into Mongolia. Now, I did have in the past a lot of complaints from Turks. They do not like listening to that. But if you look at, this is again not something that I invented or something, but Turkic tribes come from Central Asia and even have, there are so many, and we were talking about hundreds, if not even thousands of Turkic tribes coming from different parts of Asia, even from certain parts of Mongolia. And they do not like hearing that, but that's simply the truth. I mean, if you look into history books, if you look online, you will be able to trace back the roots of nowadays Turks. They would love to consider themselves Europeans, which Europe is 5% of the country of Turkey is in Europe, but the rest of Turkey is part of Asia, and the Turks originally come from Central Asia. Okay? So there's nothing to be ashamed about, there's nothing to be proud about, that's simply how it is. It's just simply what the roots of the Turkic people are. And they will play an important role for Islam later. And we will have a special episode on this one, inshallah, and I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
A special episode about the Ottoman Turks, about the spread of Islam through the Ottomans to the Balkan countries, to Greece, to now the areas up to Austria, basically. And interesting cases like the split in Hungary and in Finland, the Turkic tribes coming into Europe, basically settling under Attila the Hun, settling down in Hungary. That's why Hungary is called Hungary, because their ancestors go back to the Huns, which who are originally Central Asian people. Turkic people again. Now, according to historians, through the zealous missionary work, I use the term again, through the zealous activities of the Da'is, of the Samanid rulers, as many as 30,000 tens of Turks accepted Islam, and later under the Ghaznavids, the number of converts increased even more. So that's the time when the Turkic peoples actually accept Islam, and that's the time when Islam was spread in Central and Inner Asia, and the Turkic people moving out of Central Asia into the West, and moving further closer to nowadays Turkey, and to areas, as I mentioned before, the split in Eastern Europe, the split in Finland, in Hungary, and Turkic people went to Finland. Now, believe it or not, Daniel, do you know that Finnish people actually, and hey, if they could behead me, they would do it right now as I'm speaking, but Finnish people are actually no Scandinavian people. Do you know that? They are no Scandinavian people. They belong to the people of the Finno-Hungarian race, Finno-Hungarian culture and language. So Finnish is not the same like Swedish or Norwegian or Icelandic or Danish, but very, very different. It has common roots with the Turkish and Hungarian language.
Yeah, there is only, in fact, there is Scandinavian links only because there has been many people migrating from Sweden, I believe, to Finland. I think that's the only link there is, really.
Yeah, I mean, the Swedish people, there are Swedish people in Finland, as there are Finnish people also in Sweden, but this all has to do with the past of, it used to be one kingdom, but again, we're not going too deep into this history, but indeed, yes, there is some roots, of course, commonalities, because of the geographical location. They are next to each other. I mean, Sweden and Finland are not far from each other. Norway is not far from each other. So, of course, there are some links there. But the Finnish people are not Scandinavian people, meaning they have no Scandinavian roots. They come originally, their roots are Central Asian, their roots are Finno-Hungarian roots as the Hungarian people have. So basically the same people. There are a lot of words in the Hungarian language and in the Finnish language that originally come from Turkish. Okay? And the Hungarians don't like admitting it. I remember, was it 2 months ago, I was in Budapest, and it was quite interesting to do one of these tours, these typical tourist tours through Budapest, with a bus. And then we had a tour guide there who was telling us about the only good thing she told us about the Turks was that there are several words that they use in Hungarian still nowadays that have Turkish roots. Furthermore, everything else was bad about the Turks. So I took her aside and I spoke to her. I couldn't let this go. But mashallah, it was interesting to see that the Hungarians still have problems nowadays with that issue.
Why is this such a, I don't know if tension is the right word. Why is there still a little bit of a friction between Turks and, say, Hungarians?
I mean, first of all, we will speak about it. The Ottoman Empire. Okay, peoples who used to be ruled by the Ottomans nowadays have this misconception of the Ottoman Empire. They were given this misconception, still are at schools and education, that the Ottoman Turks were actually monsters. Okay, that's a little bit just roughly, summarized, and I myself went through the system. I myself went to Greek school, and they were giving us the idea that Turks were nothing else but monsters, and they just wanted to basically rape our women and kill our population. So that's a little bit given through to all these nowadays Christian, European, most of them, Balkan people, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, even Albania, although 70% of the Albanians are Muslims, Greece, Turkey, and so on, and Cyprus, and so on. So they get the idea that the Turks were something, monsters. They were monsters, nothing else. So there is a kind of, what shall we call it? Something like they don't like looking back to the history, the common history with the Ottomans. But it's a misconception, and we will talk about it as well, inshallah, because not everything that the Ottomans brought to Europe and did under the rules, or was done under the rules of the Ottomans, was bad, of course. Cannot be. It cannot be, right? I think everybody will understand that. Yeah, now, around the 600s and 700s, there were some states of Turkic peoples like Turkic Khazar, the Khazar people, and the Turkish Khaganate, who fought against the Caliphate in order to stop Arabization and Islamization. Now, what is happening? I just mentioned these words. You don't have to remember them, but the Khazar people, these are Turkic people who actually, during the time of the spread of Islam, 600, 700, that was during the time that they fought the Arabs and the Arab garrisons in Asia, and considered the Arabization and Islamization of themselves and of people around them, considered this as being a bad thing. But again, Arabization is something that didn't really exist. The Arabic language, Western historians like using these terms. The Arab language was given through the Muslims use Arabic until nowadays, right? We know that we live in Europe. Now, I myself speak some Arabic and write some Arabic, not because I feel I'm Arabized or something, and I don't think that I'm Arabizing my children, but we're learning Arabic for the Quran, for the sake of understanding the Holy Book, which has remained all these centuries the same that it is. Okay, and that's a very important point, and it could have not happened, otherwise it would have happened the same that happened to the Bible, with the changes, with the translations of the Bible. We also changed the Bible, right? We don't have the original Bible. Nobody has the original Bible nowadays. It's not present at all anymore, whereas the original Quran in Arabic is there. Of course, there are translations of the Quran, and we need to have them in order to understand the Quran. For people who don't understand Arabic, of course, that's absolutely normal. But the Quran itself is there in Arabic and will always stay in Arabic, inshallah. So there is no Arabization in that case. But they felt that they were Arabized, and they felt that the Arabic culture and civilization took over. So they were fighting this, the Turkic tribes. Islamization, of course, that time they considered that they had their own cultures. Turkic culture is available, no problem at all. But many of them were shamanists. They were following the shamanist religion, which is basically a lot of, working with jinns, working with having a little bit of this ancestry cult like it exists in Africa, actually. So they considered Islam being an intruder. But very, very soon the Turks and the Turkic tribes, most of them accept Islam, and we will find out the irony of history is, as we mentioned before with the Berbers in North Africa, that it's going to be the Turks who will take over after the Abbasids, the Arabs, after the Umayyads and the Abbasids lose their power. It's going to be the Seljuks, the Turkish Seljuks, and the Ottomans who will basically spread Islam into Europe, Eastern Europe, and to other parts of the world, and they will basically the ones who rule the Muslim world, without a doubt.
Would this actually, with the Seljuks and the Ottomans, was this actually the, what's the right word? Was this the rebirth of expansion?
Well, it was the first time that the Muslims went into Eastern Europe and into parts of Asia where the Muslim Arabs before did not go. So, whereas the Umayyads went to Al-Andalus, as we know, went up to France, the Ottoman Turks from the other side, they came from east. So they went into Balkan countries, they went into Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Serbia, former Yugoslavia, Albania, Greece. So they went into areas which were not entirely before taken by the Muslim Arabs, by the Umayyads. Or the Abbasids. But islands like Rhodes and Crete was mentioned before already. These were islands that belong nowadays to Greece. They had already felt the Islam from the south. Okay, not from the east. Now it came from the now it came from the east. I'm right. It's coming basically from the Central Asian side, basically. Yeah. So there's a difference. There's a small difference, yes.
So we are, of course, moving on closer to our break. But after the break, what are we going to come back to talk about? Because we've still got quite a bit left.
Well, yes, we have the Mongols. We should never forget, very important tribe in Central Asia, the Mongols, Genghis Khan, the Kazakhs, the Uzbeks, all these people basically living in the former Soviet Union. Nowadays, Soviet Union has split up. It's the Russian Federation. So, of course, all these people there, basically, they play an important role for the spread of Islam as well. They themselves will play a role later also. Islam will spread through them as well. We will see also that these are the whole Central Asian peoples who accept Islam with their own language, with their own culture and everything. And I find it exciting, actually, to see that it's not an Arab Islam that's spreading there, but it's an Islam that's spreading within the Asian people and comes to Europe, comes into Eastern Europe, goes into the Eastern Europe and Balkan area, as we know. So, yeah, that's basically what we're going to do, inshallah, after the break.
Yep, please stay with us. You are listening to Islam Through the Ages on 93.5 Unity FM with me, Daniel Raza, and Dr. Stef Keris. So we hope to see you straight after the break. Welcome back to Islam Through the Ages with me, Daniel Raza, and Dr. Stef Keris, our expert historian. We are talking about Asia. You are joining us on the second part of the 5th episode in our series. And we talked a little bit before the break about the Islamic spread, of course, through Persia. And we mentioned that during this half hour we will be talking about the Mongols, and we're going to be talking a little bit about India. But from where we are left off, where are we going to be continuing from, Dr. Stef?
Well, we're going to definitely mention the issue of the Mongols, the Mongol invasion of Central Asia, and how, basically, because we should not forget, people just mix it up, and Muslims even mix it up. The Mongols under Genghis Khan were not Muslims, okay? But the Mongols later, they accepted Islam. And it's interesting to see that it happened. It's the first time in history that this happens, that a victorious people accepts the religion or the culture of the people whom they actually won over. So the Mongols accept Islam later, and as we all know, how the Arabs were feeding them, especially the Battle of Baghdad in 1258. That's something very important to mention. It was brutal and tough. They have gone into history, and I've tried to do a lot of research on them, because I do not want to be seen like these people, basically repeating what they hear about the Mongols. But it seemed to be like this, that they were quite brutal and rough people. They seemed to be quite brutal, and the Mongol invasion, I think, is the right word, that they invaded Central Asia under Hulagu Khan. And after the Battle of Baghdad in 1258, as I mentioned, Mongol rule extended across the breadth of almost all Muslim lands in Asia, and the Caliphate was destroyed, and Islam was persecuted by the Mongols and replaced by Buddhism as the official religion of the land. That happened in the 13th century.
In the 1500s, if you look at it, the whole empire actually spread all the way through, I believe, China, and I think just a large part of Asia, to be honest with you.
Well, that's after, what did you say exactly? When was it?
1500.
Yeah, that's much later. The 13th century is still the century of the Mongols. Yeah. Okay, 1258, that was the Battle of Baghdad. So in the 13th century, still we're talking about the Mongol invasion, the threat by the Mongols, the fear that they spread. And people all over the world feared the Mongols, because, as I said, they seem to be a brutal and cruel people, actually, the way they were dealing with their subjects. And they were there. It was like a wave of brutality going over Asia and getting into Europe even. But they were the ones who 1295, the new Khan of the Ilkhanate, Raza, converted to Islam, and 2 decades later the Golden Horde followed suit. The Mongols had been religiously and culturally conquered. This absorption ushered in a new age of Mongol Islamic synthesis that shaped the further spread of Islam in Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. So here, as we saw again with the Berbers, as we saw with the Turks, we see also with the Mongols that actually they accept Islam at the end of the 13th century, 1295, and they are the ones who spread Islam also into India. We should not forget that the Mughal dynasty in India, by the way, I don't know if you know something about it, Daniel, But I think originally you come from that area, right? Indian subcontinent?
Yeah, Indian subcontinent, yeah.
So basically, if you look at the Mughal dynasty in the Indian subcontinent, you will see that actually they have roots to the Mongols. They go back to the Mongols. The Mongols have roots to the Turkic tribes. So basically, they're also of Turkic origin. So all this plays a role in people. That's why people mix it up. People nowadays who really don't know history, an average person, I would say, mixes up the idea of the Mongols being actually the ones who were so brutal and terrible, but being Muslim. But actually, they were this before they were Muslim. So we have to distinguish that clearly. There was a time before they accepted Islam. There was a time after they accepted Islam.
So when we're talking about the Mongols, what we see with a lot of empires, we're talking about one big sort of long reign and how long they'd stayed there, and we'd talk about them in general. Whereas with the Mongols, is what you're saying, we'd actually split it into two different time periods?
Well, it's a little bit like we mentioned before. Who was it before? Actually, the Arabs themselves with East Africa. If you consider now East African history, Zanzibar, Tanzania. If you look at Zanzibar and the connection to the Arab world, there was a connection and trade relationship before Islam with the Arabs, and there was a connection and trade relationship after. So the Mongols, the way they were, and the wave of brutality and the invasion and the threat and the fear that people feared at that time by the Mongols was rather by the non-Muslim Mongols. Okay? Whereas when the Mongols accepted Islam later, and this is something that happened the first time in history, by the way, they conquered people and accepted the conquered people's religion, the conquered people's culture. So the Mongols accepted actually Islam, although they had conquered the Muslims. Okay, they didn't have to. Basically, if you consider, they obviously accepted Islam because of Islam, but they didn't have to. It was not that normally it's the people who are conquered accept the victorious position, the religion or culture, but that's the other way around here now. And this is the first time that this happened in history, and this is amazing again. It's an amazing fact again, isn't it? The Mongol invasion played an important role, and in the end, it played an important role in the way that the Mongols later, when they accepted Islam, they also took Islam further to the rest of Asia. And, India will play a big role for them. India is a massive, the Indian subcontinent, again, not as we know India nowadays. We're talking about the whole of India, the Indian subcontinent, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka maybe, and all these, the entire place that belonged to India at that time. That was ruled by the Mongols, and the Mughals, basically, their ancestors were Mongols. Basically, they came from Central Asia, and they brought Islam into India. And if we look at Mughal rule in India, I mean, there is so much to say, subhanAllah ta'ala. It's amazing. I myself do not know that much about the specific period of time and the specific country, India. There are more people out there who are more expert in that way. But the Mughal rule is fantastic, interesting, and there are a lot of different periods of the rule that we have to consider and see that we cannot just all put them all into one, on the same level, basically. They were all different.
And would you basically encourage? And I just want to actually, in fact, I'll say this point, to anybody who is listening, because obviously, knowing about the sort of ancestry and even knowing about the history of the countries that you may have come from, like Pakistan or India, or say the Indian subcontinent, take this as an opportunity to think about maybe reading about it. It's a very good opportunity to go to the library, read a book on the Mughals.
I think it's absolutely right. I mean, I'm very, very sure what I know. Many people from that area now, maybe as you said, Pakistanis, Indians, Bengalis, they don't consider they don't really know that much about their history and about their own country. I mean, if you want to know about Bangladesh, know about Bangladesh. But yeah, Bangladesh is still used to be part of India as well. So you need to know more about Indian history. and you need to go back there and find out about how it really was. And I mean, Mughal history is amazing. It's not something. It's like the trip that I had to go through, finding out more about the Ottoman Empire and the Ottomans in my country and the Balkans. That's, I think, something that still Pakistanis and Indians and Bengalis have to do still. And there is a lot out there that you can do. I mean, just to mention that one again, we are going to India in February, inshallah. I mean, the Halal Choice is going to India. Whoever is interested, we will have a specific Mughal trip for 11 days going to India, inshallah, in February. So take a look at the website maybe again, just to see how things are going, Islam, thehalalchoice.com. So just to see if whoever is interested, inshallah. But indeed, the Mongol rulers converted to Islam at the end of the 13th century, 1295, and then the 14th century on, they were the ones who basically spread Islam, and they were the ones who, during the next 3 centuries, from 1300s on to 1600s, basically, all these mainly Buddhist, shamanists, and Christian, Turkic, and Mongol nomads, they mostly are the ones who accept Islam later. So the Turkic tribes that were still there, that were either shamanists, as I said before, or maybe some even Buddhists, or even some Christians, because of course Christianity was there before, and many Mongols, they accept many different Mongol tribes, they accept then later Islam through the Mongol rulers during that time.
So do we see like a whole sort of bunch of native cultures being replaced by one ummah, essentially?
Not necessarily replaced, but added. Islam is getting another picture now. Islam is becoming a multi-ethnic, multilinguistic, multicultural empire and ummah. In the contrast to what it was during the time that was the Arabian Peninsula going up to the Sham region, of course. Now they have to deal with another type of people. They have to deal with Buddhists, whom they did not know before. I mean, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, all of them. There were no Buddhists there before. In Africa, there were no Buddhists before. So now they have to deal with Buddhists also. People who bow down in front of Buddha or in front of statues. So this is different again than it was with other people. Shamanists could accept or did accept Islam more easily, although some of their ancient belief with some of the people of the shamanists they're still there. I mean, we have even Turkish people nowadays who feel closer to shamanism than to Islam. Even nowadays there are some people like this. But again, if you don't understand the basic rules of Islam, then you rather go back to what your ancestors told you if you don't understand Islam. So you have to find out about what Islam actually means. And many people, we lack in the Muslim world, unfortunately, and I'm sure you agree with me, we have people who don't read nowadays. We have people who don't read, they don't find out, they're not interested. They just live the Islam that was given through to them by their fathers and forefathers and whatever. So basically, that's the pity. That's a pity for a Muslim nowadays, because our deen is massive. Our deen is fantastic. You can find out so many things. And with these people who accepted Islam, I mentioned that before, also the Persian language goes out there. Persian becomes a very important language. People learn rather Persian than Arabic. The Ottomans, even during their reign, Persian was considered, they used to write poems in Persian rather than in Arabic. Yeah. And, Sufism is also growing. The influence of Sufi sheikhs and Sufi saints, let's call them that way, although we know in Islam we don't have saints, but Sufi saints, Sufi sheikhs, they become also an important part of the Asian Islam. Naqshbandi, especially the sect of Naqshbandi, the Naqshbandi sect is becoming one of the most important Sufi orders in Asia. And India, as we mentioned before, plays an important role as well. We have nowadays, the sources again don't tell you the exact numbers, but we have quite a massive number of Muslims in India. I mean, basically, India would be considered rather a Muslim country if it didn't have so many. It's amazing. India is, of course,
it's the second most prominent religion.
It is. I mean, more than 100 million Muslims in India, if I'm not wrong. More than 100 million in India alone, so more than in Pakistan, actually.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And that, of course, shapes cities and entire regions in India.
Kerala.
I mean, yeah, Kerala in the south has a big percentage of Muslims, although it's not the majority. Again,
No,
just
it's
to
not
make
the
sure.
majority.
I thought
No,
so.
yeah,
I
no.
thought so before,
It's not the
actually, before I
majority.
found out. Then entire areas in China, Xinjiang area, for example, which is entirely Muslim. And they have Central Asian or Turkic roots also themselves, but it's part of China nowadays. You mentioned southern India, where Islam arrived very, very, very early. And if I'm not wrong, let me just take a look at the date. No, Islam said to have arrived in Manipur, which is northeast India, in 615 already. 615. 615. So,
Malik Dinar.
Malik Dinar. Oh, yes, very good. What do you know? Yes, tell us something.
He was actually I've got to be correct here. He actually was around during the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, and he was actually the first, I believe, Muslim follower to actually have arrived in India. That's what some people have said.
Well, together with him also Sa'd ibn Waqas, as far as I know, Sa'd ibn Waqas, who was a Sahaba, and Uwais al-Qarni. These were Sahabas who were actually known, 100%, that I can tell you 100%, who were there and played a big role in India and helped to spread Islam. One important thing we have to mention with India and with the Central Asian area, how Islam spread, again, a very important point, not by the sword again, but through the Silk Route. The Silk Route, we have to mention this, has to be mentioned. There is no Asia Islam without the Silk Route.
It's still a big part, isn't it? No, it's still great.
Well, yeah, the Silk Route doesn't really exist anymore. Okay, it used to be...
Recently, though, I'd say maybe in the last couple of hundred years.
Well, we do have still trade going on between the countries that used to be part of the Silk Route, but the Silk Route itself does not really exist. It has become a myth, or a legend, not a myth. It has become a legend, actually.
Okay.
But it did exist indeed, and it was important for the people in Central Asia because they traded stuff, objects, but they also traded religions and cultures.
Yes, okay.
You have a lot of influence from Islam because of the Silk Route in Asia, in China, or in India, or in Afghanistan, or in Central Asia in general, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, and so on. So all these countries, because of the Silk Route, they accepted Islam because of the traders. Again, like in Africa. There you go, Daniel, again. Do we see that Islam was not spread by the sword? And we see it clearly in Africa and in Asia. We see clearly that people who were not Arabs accepted Islam because of Islam. And this is an important point again, and I keep stressing this one. I want to stress this one, especially because we have these kind of shows here now. Because we don't want people to still walk away after having listened to our show and not understand that that Islam was actually was not spread by the sword.
And in a way, this is one of our main aims, basically, isn't it? To articulate that Islam was actually spread peacefully. And we keep mentioning these merchants and these trade routes. This seems to be one of the main ways of it happening.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, it's a pattern. You will see that in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia. We will see exactly the same, inshallah, in one of the other episodes. We will see that exactly that's the way that Islam spread because of trade. And, alhamdulillah, because there is no racism in Islam, we have a lot of cases where Arab, Persian rulers, but also da'is marry African or Asian girls. And this, of course, gives automatically whole dynasties of Muslims, and entire dynasties of them. And yeah, well, China we mentioned quickly, just to mention this one again. We will come back to China, but yeah, in 616-17 already, 3 Sahabis preached in China among the Hui people, actually, where many of them embraced Islam in the time of 616-617. So amazing! Look at how early it goes back. 615, 616, 617. Yes, this is really amazing. I mean, as we mentioned, Islam arrived in Kerala, in the south of India, also very early. We should not forget, of course, where southern India is. It's close to the ocean, of course, to the sea. So because of trade, of course, people could easily end up there. The first mosque was built in 629 in Malabar, and
Sheraman Juma Masjid, I believe it's called.
Say this again, please.
Sheraman Juma.
I don't have the exact date. Okay, that might be.
I think that's what it's called.
Okay. This is the first one. That was the one built 629.
Yes.
In India. Okay, mashallah. If people can double check this one, that's very interesting. Oh, you have internet there. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I have internet.
Exactly. There we go. There we go.
Yeah, it's Cheraman Juma Masjid. That's what I've got it down as.
Jazakallah khair. That's nice. Excellent. Well, there we go. We always learn something else. That's great. Great. Now, so we got a name also to the first masjid in India, and then we have also some issues of the way that India dealt with the Muslims and the Muslims dealt with India, because we do have, as I mentioned before, some periods of time where they're quite different to each other. Like we do have some of the Mughal rulers accepting the Hindus and the Sikhs as Ahl al-Kitab and giving them the same rights that they would give the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews, basically, the way that they were the Christians and Jews were treated in Europe and in other parts of the world where they were. Where certain people would have a problem with, obviously, because Hindus are not people of the book, but that kept the peace in the country. Then we have also to look into the Barmakid family. That's also an important dynasty, important family to mention. They were early supporters of the Abbasid revolt against the Umayyads. So, as we know, the Umayyads had to give up power to the Abbasids in 750, but not just, giving the throne away, but it was a massacre, and the Abbasids actually killed the Umayyads that time, and the only part where the Umayyads still were ruling was Al-Andalus still. So the Barmakid family actually supported the Abbasid revolt, and this gave Khalid bin Barmak considerable influence, and his son Yahya ibn Khalid was the vizier of the Caliph al-Mahdi and tutor of Harun al-Rashid. A very important name, Harun al-Rashid. I think people know him from 1001 Nights. Okay?
Oh, right, okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yahya's son al-Fadl al-Jafar both occupied higher offices under Harun al-Rashid. And that was in the time of 786 to 809. That was the time that Harun al-Rashid was ruling, 786 to 809. Now, important to mention also that many Barmakids were patrons of the sciences, which greatly helped the propagation of Indian science and scholarship from the neighboring academy of Gundi Shapur into the Arabic world. Now, interesting enough to see here now that not only the influence from Islam and the Arabs, but also the influence from Indian science, and science that was because Indian civilization, mashallah, we have to say that Chinese civilization is a massive civilization, very big, thousands of years old, the oldest civilizations in the world, and they had to offer a lot. Medicine, science, a lot of stuff that basically the Muslims did not know, that we would not have known nowadays if we didn't get it from the Indians and Chinese as well.
I've got an example of, I think, Samaritan paper.
Oh, yes.
Which basically replaced papyrus, which was being used.
True.
And we know this has been used for a very long time, since the Egyptians, which is about 5,000 years ago.
Well, this is true. And as we know, during the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they did not have paper. So, it was important when the Indians gave paper, or when paper came from India, China through. And the numbers, Indian numbers, for example, the numbers that are nowadays called, what we use in Europe, we call them basically Arabic numbers, but they're actually Indian numbers, and Indian numbers are Arabic numbers. So the Indians took over the Arab numbers, the Arabs took over the Indian numbers. So, a mix. It's amazing, isn't it, how cultures influence each other. So basically, also, of course, we have Hindu medical works, which was translated into both Arabic and Persian. Again, the Persian language plays a massive role, and a very important role until nowadays. There are people in Asia who rather speak Persian as a second language than Arabic, Muslims. And let's mention the total number of Muslims in Asia. I mentioned before in the last episode how I consider Africa being a Muslim continent, but Asia, because of the number, the massive number of more than 1 billion in 2010, Asia having more than 1 billion Muslims, 25% of the total population were in 2010 basically Muslims in Asia. So Asia is home to the largest Muslim population in the world, with the Western, Middle East, Central Asia, South Asia and Southeast Asia being particularly important regions. 62% of the world's Muslims live in Asia, with Indonesia, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh having the 4 largest Muslim populations in the world. Again, Indonesia, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. The spread of Islam outside of the Arabian Peninsula and into other parts of the continent can be linked to the extensive trade routes connecting the Middle East to China. Muslim traders influenced, of course, the way that people looked at them and their societies, Muslims from outside. And then, mashallah, like this, we could definitely spread Islam into Asia, up to Southeast Asia, up to countries like China, which people would not consider as having any part in the Muslim world at all. But we do have big Muslim minorities in China. And having 50, 60, 100 million Muslims in China is nothing with the population that they have. Obviously, for them it's a small minority, but for us Muslims, 100 million, that's the Arabs alone. Even less, actually. The Turks are even around 100, not even 100 million. So 100 million Chinese Muslims is basically massive.
There's only 70 million people in the UK.
Exactly,
Just people in itself. So, that's another thing we have to consider when we look at the population percentages which you mentioned. There's so many Hindus in Pakistan because it's such a large country with such a huge population, and then you've got China, which is going to have a very large Buddhist population. China, I think, I might be wrong, but that they have one of the largest populations in the world, I believe, and they actually had to. We know politically they took measures on reducing population.
True. That's why China has the biggest population in the world. Yes, yeah. That's true. And then it's India, basically. Yeah. Although people say, I have found out actually through sources that they say that India soon is gonna become number 1 rather than number 2 at the moment. So it's going to go over over China, so over population. But as you said, the Chinese, there is this one-child policy in China, which basically they support having just one child. And if you have just one child, you get a massive house. If you got more than one child, or you have 2, 3, you get just one apartment. So basically just trying to reduce getting a bigger number of children. So indeed, you're absolutely right, mashallah. I mean, it is amazing. I find it fascinating actually going to look into the spread of Islam into Asia. We will have another episode, inshallah, going to Southeast Asia, looking into Indonesia, Malaysia, China itself, and looking into the massive influence that Islam and the Muslims have had into Asian culture, and the other way around as well, mashallah. Again, I would like to come to the end, basically, of this fantastic episode. Jazakumullahu khair, everybody. I hope that is of benefit what we have discussed here, and I hope that everybody goes back to the internet at least, if not even into books. I would like to actually encourage everyone listening to us to find out more and go deeper into maybe their own country even if you're a British Muslim. I mean, there's a lot to discover about Britain and Islam. Jazakumullah khair again, and I hope to see you soon, or to basically welcome you to the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.